Welcome to Future Talk. On today's program, we're going to talk about the globalization of technology, what that means to us, and how it's going to affect our lives. My guest is Richard Dasher, Director of the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center at Stanford University and Executive Director of the Center for Integrated Systems, also at Stanford. In addition to his Stanford work, Dr. Dasher maintains an active consulting practice, working with governments and private companies in the U.S. and Asia, advising them on technological trends and new business opportunities. He also speaks fluent Japanese and was the first non-Japanese person ever asked to join the senior governance of a major Japanese university when he was appointed to the board of directors of Tohoku University in 2004. He's also served as director of the U.S. State Department's training centers in Japan and Korea. Richard, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, Marty. I'm looking forward to the talk this evening.
So what exactly do we mean by globalization of technology? What does that phrase actually signify?
Well, that's a great question. It means different things to different people. To me, what it really means is selecting the very best resources, business partners, and market opportunities on a worldwide scale so that the technology is one thing that you're looking at. If you open up an iPhone or you open up any kind of electronic device now, the parts of that device have traveled hundreds of thousands of miles, and they were all selected because they were the best ones that the company wanted to put in the product.
So nothing is totally made in the USA anymore. Everything has parts from all over the world.
That's right. And a lot of things that look like they're coming from other places actually have things from the U.S. too.
Now, are there any problems with globalization? Let's say you're depending on some country for your supplies and for some political reason or something else that stops flowing.
Well, globalization depends on open borders and open access. It also depends on cheap transportation. It also depends, if you're in an economy that's expensive, like our economy is, it depends on having something that you bring that's valuable that other people can't really copy.
Because in the United States, labor costs are fairly expensive compared to many places in Asia, for example. So if we globalize everything and capital always looks for the cheapest labor, is that going to cost us a lot of jobs here?
Some jobs will naturally flow offshore. It can't be helped. But what you have to do if you're a government is to make sure that you have a good balance in your economy of different kinds of skills. That's not always a business solution. That's why the government really should pay attention to the labor market. But on the other hand, if you're in a place like Silicon Valley, we need to be doing things that are appropriate for a very expensive economy. And actually, innovation is one of the best things that you can use to keep a high standard of living in an economy.
So do you mean that if you have more and better ideas than other people in other countries, that's what keeps you ahead? You're on the cutting edge?
That's right. If you can standardize something, it will flow to a cheaper place. But you can't standardize innovation because the new ideas, every case is unique. It's different. And it also involves personal choices about taking risk. Those are areas where if you're in early, you see the new waves as they're beginning, you can do well. Silicon Valley has done well despite the fact that there's really been a number of different waves in the history of the Valley in which really our core industry has changed. Now the core industry is not really semiconductor manufacturing like it used to be.
Well, what is the core industry here now?
Somewhere in between social networks and big data. We're kind of in between two big waves, I think.
Now, Silicon Valley has always been a leader of innovation. Is that because we did something right, or did it happen kind of accidentally? How do we know that it will continue to be the leader in that?
Well, that's a great question. You can always lose something, right? But I think that the system here grew up over 100 years. And what you have is a really good balance of top-level people in different sectors coming to cooperate with each other. Innovation depends crucially on people having new ideas. New ideas are great to get at the boundaries between one field and another. That's why we have a lot of good science research going on here in various areas that will come out into new innovative products. It's the people who fund that. It's the people who are willing to take the risks of that. It's the people who are willing to go to work in a young, rapidly growing company that really make the Valley very strong. I don't see it changing anytime soon. But what I do see is Silicon Valley participating more in world markets. Every place like Silicon Valley that's an innovation center has to be supported by product sales in a much bigger market. That was the United States until about 1990, but Silicon Valley has really become part of the Pacific Rim since then. That's one reason I'm here. That's one reason I've been here at Stanford for 21 years now, is to help the students at Stanford and the Silicon Valley community know how to be more successful in Asia.
Now, where did you get your background in Asia? Because you're not Japanese, but you're on the board of directors of a Japanese university. How did you get into that field?
Well, it went way back to graduate school. I started my PhDs in linguistics, and I studied Japanese because it was a non-European language that not many people had studied, and I wanted to be able to do analysis of that language because it had theoretical meaning. Then I decided I didn't want to be a college professor. So instead of going to work at a U.S. university as an assistant professor, I went to work for the State Department. I wanted to do something practical, so I helped train the American diplomats that were assigned to the embassies and consulates in Japan and Korea. I did that for 5 years. 4 years I was director of a field school out in Japan that was attached to the embassy in Tokyo. And at the end of that, I decided that I really better get some business experience. So I went to work in 2 Japanese companies doing international rights licensing. And it was a wonderful experience. I got a lot of experience in 3 short years. And they were starting up this strange little technology management center in Stanford School of Engineering. I put in a couple of proposals for courses that I thought would be good to teach, and they hired me.
Are there any cultural aspects that facilitate innovation? So, for example, is there anything different about Asian culture compared to American that creates a different environment for innovation?
Well, I actually have to say that I think Silicon Valley is different from a lot of the rest of the United States. The rest of the United States, where you have older conservative traditions and less fluidity in the labor market, it's very difficult to have the kind of robust innovation system that you get here. Japan is even more so. Because of labor shortages after World War II, the big companies in Japan started to offer these unwritten contracts for lifetime employment. It was never written into the contract, but it became the expectation. And that meant that the best people would go to the big companies and they would stay there for their whole lives. Kind of like IBMers used to be here, Big Blue.
In Silicon Valley, people jump jobs very quickly. It's rare to stay in any job for more than a few years.
And there's a good and a difficult side to that. Part of it has to fit the person. The good side of it is you're always getting reallocation of economic resources. The best people will look for the best new projects and go to them. They will jump to them. The bad side of it is you do get a lot of waste. You get a lot of uncertainty. It feels very uncertain to be a member of the Silicon Valley labor force.
Now, does the globalization of technology tend to erode national boundaries? Does it tend to weaken forces of nationalism?
It should. I think that in the real world, you will always have individual countries, individual regions looking out for themselves, kind of at the expense of other people. So before the program started, I was talking with one of the people here about Brazil, which has just introduced a local content law, so that anything related to wireless communications has to have at least 50% local content. Well, okay, that means that the people who had been exporting computer chips to Brazil are going to have a lot harder time. But it also opened up a huge opportunity. IBM has invested $100 million, along with some Brazilian companies, in a major new semiconductor fab in Brazil. So everything keeps changing. I do think that with the internet and with data transfer, you really don't even know where your information is now. So that has become incredibly borderless. But yet the legal system hasn't kept up because you don't know if there's a problem, which court should be the court to try the legal problem in.
Now, some countries have radically different legal systems. Some countries feel very threatened by the internet. It's going to reveal too much information. It'll allow criticism of the government. This massive flow of information, do you think it's a totally beneficial thing, or does it carry some risks with it?
Of course it carries risks. And it carries a great deal of extra cost for companies that have to hedge their risks in different places. It used to be you could start a new product in some market and grow that market in a relatively good way, and then if you wanted to expand, that's great. But now, as soon as you announce a product anywhere, information about that product goes all over the world, and other people can re-engineer around it. You know, at the basic level, how do you handle the expenses of global competition when you really don't have time to grow a domestic market first?
And patents might not always work because not everybody respects patents. They could be copying your designs in other countries, and there's not a whole lot you can do.
Well, even if you don't get to the problem of enforcement, which is a big problem, the patent system now is that a patent protects you in one single country. If you want protection in multiple countries, you have to pay the fees for filing the patent and managing the patent in each one of those countries. There are ways to make that process easier, and it's a lot simpler process than it used to be, but it's still expensive. And if you're a startup company, that's a huge expense.
Is there any attempt to reform the patent system by internationalizing it so there would be something as an international patent in every country that subscribed to that treaty or whatever it was would be obliged to live up to it?
There's a lot of efforts in that direction. I think it will be a while before we actually have a truly borderless patent system. I think that individual countries don't want to give up their control so much.
Now, if there's a lot of innovation in other countries, let's say China or Korea or Japan, is that good for the United States, or does it threaten the United States if they start to get ahead of us?
Well, certainly we have to be competitive, right? And we have to compete against people that we didn't used to have to compete against. So that's a new challenge. On the other hand, if you look at it as playing sports in a big league, the better the whole league, the better you will be as a performer. And I think that that's probably what's happened. Now, China's in an unusual situation because it's still in the middle of this huge growth from almost zero 30 years ago. And so China is having so many opportunities in the domestic market that most Chinese companies are actually remarkably domestically focused. They're not really trying to go global yet. Only a few companies like Huawei, like Haier, like some of the other companies that are working with, like Foxconn that's doing manufacturing for foreign firms in China, have really thought globally. So China's in a slightly different position. They're still building out their domestic infrastructure so much. But Japan, especially Korea only has, 40 million people, 45 million people in South Korea. So if you really want to have a good, successful technology and you're in Korea, you have to think globally very early. So they actually are very forward-looking in going into global markets.
Now, the companies gain certain advantages not only by having cheaper labor, but by also having looser environmental regulations, because that's part of the cost of doing business in most countries.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that doesn't apply so much in Japan and Korea as it does in China. Japan and Korea are advanced. They're very concerned about the quality of the environment. There's, I think, more issues in China because there's so much development inside China itself. The East Coast cities, average income is probably around $18,000 or $19,000 a year. Inside the interior, the average income is probably around $3,000 a year. To have that much difference in incomes within a country puts an awful lot of stress on it. And one of the ways that it's trying to get by is things that we would not like in regard to environmental policies, but ultimately it's fascinating what that's done to Chinese consumers. The rollout of the China domestic economy has shifted to really consumer lines of business being the real driver of economic growth now. And Chinese consumers are buying a lot of foreign products because they feel that they're safer than the products made in China.
I've heard that a lot of products coming from China might be of some dubious quality. They compete very well on price. I'm not sure what else they compete on.
Well, we've had some bad experiences here. And of course, a few bad experiences make everything look bad. But I think that a lot of that was price-based competition. The window of price-based competition is not going to last that long in China. The East Coast cities are already approaching a level where they're not that far away from the costs in Korea. And that means that they're already seeing a flow offshore of some jobs, not only into the interior of China, but down into other countries like Vietnam.
Well, now that we've embarked on the path of technology, do you think that this will just go on forever, or is this kind of a historic bubble that will come to an end, like most things come to an end?
I have to say, I think we're really in the middle of the newest industrial revolution. If you look at the early 1800s being the first industrial revolution, and then the rise of mass manufacturing being the second revolution at the beginning of the 1900s, we're now in the information technology version of the Industrial Revolution. Life is not going to go back to the way that it was. With the possible, terrible cataclysmic, if it's not like Einstein said, where World War IV will be fought with bows and arrows, as long as we don't have something that destroys civilization as we know it, I don't think we're going to go back. Technology is a part of our lives. We're living our lives in a different way than our parents did, or even as we did when I was a young person.
Now, what's the implication of all the information technology, aside from the money to be made by people who manufacture it and sell it? Is it changing the world in a fundamental way, the fact that you can see what's going on all over the world, and you can't keep secrets anymore because you're being spied on all the time?
True, but the data itself doesn't have much value. What I see is an awful lot of data everywhere, and now the new wave of new kinds of businesses that's just emerging are the companies that are getting value out of that data, out of that information. Now, at the end of the day, every piece of information that's out there was donated by some person. And I do have a kind of suspicion that maybe people are going to decide that donating their information for the sake of some company's profit is not a pattern that they want to continue doing so much. I think privacy is an issue that everybody's concerned with. Always technology will take a lead and go forward. You'll have technology, people will have to deal with the problems that the technology creates. Unfortunately, I don't see any change to that pattern. I think we will solve most of the problems, but it is a continuing process.
Now, do you think that ultimately technology will bring the human race together, or are there some divisions that are so great they're not going to be bridged by any kind of technology?
Wow, what a great question. I think that in some ways the information about other groups of people is much more at hand than it used to be. But people's interests are remarkably close at hand. People care about their friends on Facebook. Do they really care what's going on across the world? Unless they happen to be friends with people across the world. And I do think that there's, in some way, a continuing danger that the more you bring groups of people together without more understanding between them, the more there will be friction. I would like to play some small constructive role to help people learn to live together and cooperate better.
Now, in order to do that, I guess people have to have some common interests. Is this a matter of heading towards some kind of global monoculture where no matter what part of the world you go to, people act pretty much the same and the standards are pretty much the same? And do we want that? Or are we better off having a wide variety of people who can't talk to each other?
I take it in a different way. Why didn't America become such a melting pot that you don't have any kind of differences between different groups of American people? I think the same thing is going to happen on a global scale. And I think that's a good thing for innovation, because the best ideas come from people who see a problem in a different way than you do. If you can talk to people with a different background, that's the power that has really helped America become what it is. And, you know, we rub in the wrong way with each other a lot, but the best ideas come from two people from different backgrounds that come together with something new.
Now, you're primarily focused on the U.S. and Asia. What about Europe? Is Europe still in the running as a technology leader?
Oh, it certainly is. In fact, Europe has done a lot with quality of life issues that I'm sort of envious of. People who can take an 8-week vacation in the middle of the summer and not really, the company doesn't suffer that much. I think that Europe has more multi-generation family companies. And I've talked a lot with several European governments. It's not particularly bad to have that old kind of established family business culture, family industry culture. But for a company to stay competitive, it must bring in new innovations. It has to have a pipeline of new ideas that it brings to market, or the customers get bored and the employees become inefficient. So a company cannot afford to become complacent.
Now, when we talk about innovation, it kind of sounds like technology can never be stable. You never reach a point where you say, this works now, so let's just use it. No, as soon as it works, it's obsolete and you have to have something else. Does that create a risk of instability over time, the fact that everything is just out for the first time?
Well, it does, and you know, we are encountering risks for technologies that are coming out before all the problems have been foreseen. That's a huge ethical problem that there's a group at Stanford that's doing some education on. I think it's really important, especially because you could introduce something into the environment that would be terribly poison to people. And if you haven't really gone through a good process to make sure that you've got the right kind of controls on it, that could be something that we can't come back from.
And when there's a huge rush to get to market, to beat the competition, that creates a temptation to take all those shortcuts.
Yeah, and this is why business needs to do good business, which is not always be there faster than everybody else. But at the end of the day, you do need multi-sector. You need the government looking out for the needs of citizens. Business really looks out for the needs of its stakeholders. And you also do need an academic, you need the university to kind of push forward and look at these things from a neutral standpoint.
Now, in the U.S., do you think that the U.S. government is doing a good enough job to sustain innovation? Is the best thing for it to do just to stay out of the way and let the innovators innovate? Or could government play a destructive role and say, well, these people are getting too rich, there's income inequality here, we have to make it harder for the more successful people so everything is more equal? I mean,
You know, this is such a finely balanced machine. It would be so easy to lose it. Even with the system that we have, the way it's implemented, if the government tried to have too much of a say in what kind of research is being done in specific research projects and starts to pick winners, it falls apart. That's not what they do well. The business sector is much better at picking the winners. Now, I think that we've got a good system. The U.S. economy, especially as far as Silicon Valley is concerned, is the place everybody else in the world wants to be. And so we do have a good system that is well balanced, but it's really easy to lose. And we have to always be worried about losing it.
And the government has also done a lot of good things in technology, like DARPA, one of the top research labs. So government has launched its own research and development, which is filtered over to the private sector.
So it's interesting that I think that shows that in America, to justify government investment in research and development, you pull out national security. DARPA is a great example, right? The Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. Whereas in Japan, which renounced war at the end of World War II, the real economic growth was its national security. And most of the government research and development money flowed into company labs through the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry.
So does it ultimately come down to the individual creative people, and it might not necessarily matter whether they work for the private sector or for the government? It's really a small handful of people who are ultimately driving it.
Yeah, if you say a handful, it sounds too small, but I think that there will be these focused centers of innovation that are probably in urban areas, and they will have elements of research and elements of commercialization and a good hand-holding out to larger markets. But in some ways, we're moving to a structure that almost looks like the ancient city-state model of the true ancient world, where the cities were the places that people wanted to be, and the countryside basically supported the cities in the old days through agriculture.
We just have about a minute or so left. Could you give an example from your own work, your own consulting, of something that's turned out particularly well?
I think one of the things I'm proudest of was being on the committee that planned the Okinawa Institute of Science and Technology. This was a university that was not under the Ministry of Education in Japan. It was created from the ground up on a green field, actually a mountaintop in Okinawa. And they have turned into something that is absolutely remarkable. The president used to be the director of SLAC, the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center. They now have about 60 faculty members from 39 or 40 countries. So I think I'm seeing there the kind of new model of globalization that will be positive for everybody.
There are a lot of hungry people out there who are willing to do whatever it takes to get ahead.
That's very true, and we need to be able to deal with the needs of those people, but it really takes a balanced system to make sure that nobody has too much power.
Okay, very good. And on that note, we're going to have to wrap because we are out of time. I've been speaking with Richard Dasher, Director of the U.S. Asia Technology Management Center at Stanford University. This is Future Talk. Visit our website, www.futuretalk.net. I'm Marty Wasserman. Visit us next time, and we'll see you soon.